Hello everyone, I am the Bearded Kirby, and welcome to my channel, The Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews and other deck techs. On this episode of The Brewery, I'll be discussing my take on a commander from March of the Machine, Elenda and Azor. If you like this deck or any of the cards I'll be mentioning throughout the video, please consider using my TCG Player affiliate link when purchasing those cards. You can find that link down in the description. It'll really help out the channel. But the very best way you can help support the channel is with my Patreon. There are plenty of perks for being a patron, such as early access to certain videos, exclusive deck techs, gifts, and more. You can also support my channel for free by simply liking, subscribing, and sharing, which also helps out a lot. I put out a video every Monday, so you don't want to miss out. You can join my Discord server for free if you want to join the Commander Tavern community. All pertinent links are down in the description. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Elenda and Azor is a 6/6 Vampire Knight Sphinx with Flying and Ward 2 for 3 generic, 1 white, 1 blue, and 1 black. Whenever they attack, you may pay X generic, 1 white, 1 blue, and 1 black to draw X cards. They also have another triggered ability to complement this one. At the beginning of each end step, that's right, each end step, which is important, you may pay 4 life. If you do, you create as many 1/1 black Vampire Knight tokens with lifelink as the number of cards you drew that turn. Suffice it to say that we want to be drawing cards at every turn. Not only that, but since the tokens are both vampires and knights, we can make the most of the best lords for these two creature types. Since we need to first have the creatures before being able to buff them with tribal effects, let's first see how we're going to get there. Elenda and Azor is quite the spell to cast at 6 mana, but at least it has Ward 2. But we'll see how to get to 6 mana quickly as well as better protect them later on. For now, let's see the card advantage effects of the deck. Consecrated Sphinx is an obvious include. Sure, it costs 6 mana to cast, but if it sticks, you'll draw a minimum of 2 cards during your opponent's turns. With enough life, you're getting Vampire Knights with lifelink each turn. You could also run more annoying effects like Esper Sentinel, Mystic Remora, and Rhystic Study so as to draw cards that way. That's a more viable strategy as well, since you're also taxing your opponents. However, many people find them annoying and might just target them from the get-go, so keep that in mind. The Sphinx is also kill on spot, but unlike the stacks effects just shown, the Sphinx also works with all of the wheel effects in the deck. Since opponents are also drawing, you're drawing your cards while twice the cards all opponents are drawing. Emergency Powers, Jace's Archivist, Echo of Eons, Time Reversal, Whispering Madness, and Windfall do just that. Of these, the best ones are the first two since they can be achieved at instant speed, which matters for when we want to draw a bunch of cards outside of our turn. That's not to say the others aren't good, we can still cast them in our own turn to draw a bunch of cards. But drawing lots of cards at the beginning of the end step before our turn makes it harder to deal with that Vampire Knight army we just created. As a bonus, Echo of Eons and Time Reversal shuffle our graveyard and hand into our library first to somewhat help prevent decking ourselves. Memory Jar, Time Spiral, and Time Twister are 3 more wheel effects you could add to your deck if you had the money for it. Well, the first 2 are literal pennies to the dollar compared to the Power 9 one, but still expensive enough where you don't have to run them if you don't have them. Shame that the Magic 30 booster packs were essentially $250 each. Otherwise, you would have been able to get a very affordable version for your non-tournament Commander games, but I digress. That's a topic I don't want to get into. In any case, apart from Consecrated Sphinx, we also have Alhammarret's Archive and Teferi's Ageless Insight to double our card draws. The Sphinx is stronger than these since we would draw 49 cards off of something like Echo of Eons, but they're still amazing nonetheless. As a bonus, the Archive also doubles the life we gain, which is important since we're spending 4 life each time we want to get our tokens. Kozilek Butcher of Truth and Ulamog the Infinite Gyre are included as more ways to shuffle our graveyard into our library. Drawing 49 cards might seem scary if it's late in the game, but if we're also shuffling what we're discarding or losing back into our library, it eases the rate at which we burn through our library. Plus, if we ever did manage to hardcast these, they're quite the threat once on board. Going back to drawing insane amounts of cards, Peer into the Abyss, Seagate Restoration, and Tolarian Winds do just that. The first one on its own is already drawing us half our library at the cost of half our life. Good thing we'll be creating a ton of tokens with lifelink. The other 2 don't inherently draw us a ton of cards, but if we already had a ton of cards in our hand, we can use these as a way to get our card draw count very high, especially Tolarian Winds since it's an instant. This allows us to create a ton of Vampire Knight tokens outside of our turn if we had a fat hand. Just remember to use these instant speed effects in response to Elenda and Azor's trigger entering the stack. Kindred Discovery and Krav the Unredeemed can also draw us a ton of cards, albeit synergistically. We can choose either Vampire or Knight with Kindred Discovery and it won't make that much of a difference. Once we have it, then any Vampire Knight token entering the battlefield will trigger it, drawing us a ton of cards. This enchantment potentially doubles how many cards we're drawing in any given turn when we trigger our commander. If that weren't enough, we also draw a ton of cards when we attack with our vampires or knights, since it's also an attack trigger. And we get the draw per creature. Super strong. Krav is also absolutely busted in this deck. In fact, it's possibly the second best creature after Consecrated Sphinx. Maybe in the top 5 cards of the deck per se. That's because for just 1 black mana and without tapping, you sacrifice X creatures to draw X cards and gain X life, while also putting X +1/+1 counters on him. This means that in response to our commander's trigger, we can activate Krav, sacrifice all of our Vampire Knight tokens, draw a ton of cards, gain a ton of life, give him a ton of +1/+1 counters, and then when our commander's trigger resolves, we just created that many Vampire Knight tokens all over again. This card is absolutely insane here. If ever there were an auto-include for a commander, it would be Krav for this one. Naturally, Reliquary Tower, Thought Vessel, and Decanter of Endless Water are included in order to help us keep our fat hand. I know I include these in decks that have a lot of card advantage engines, but for this deck they're practically a requirement, especially with all of the effects that draws cards depending on how many cards we already have in our hand. Plus the deck isn't green, so having 2 of these be Mana Rocks is quite the bonus. Soul Ring and Arcane Signet are the only other Mana Rocks in the deck, since the rest of the deck's mana acceleration is land-based ramp, but we'll see those effects later on. Now that we saw how we'll be drawing insane amounts of cards, and not just drawing during our turn but other turns as well, how do we make the most of our Vampire Knight army? Yes, dozens of 1/1 tokens can end games, but why just leave it at that? Aven Windguide, Herald of Hoofbeats, Knight Exemplar, and Valiant Knight give those tokens additional keywords beyond just lifelink. The first one gives our creatures tokens Flying and Vigilance, the second one gives our Knights Horsemanship, the third one gives our Knights Indestructible and +1/+1, while the last one also gives +1/+1, but the double strike comes at a hefty cost. However, that cost isn't so bad when you consider our tokens will be bigger and at least have lifelink. These lords do their work. Cathar's Crusade, Vodalian Wave Knight, and Starlight Spectacular are included for straight up pump effects. While half of the previous set also pump, they're included more due to their keyword boons. But these give a significant stat boost to our army. Cathar's Crusade is absolutely busted. When all of our tokens enter the battlefield together, they still all trigger it, giving each other and the rest of the creatures we already controlled that many +1/+1 counters. So even if we created only 5 Vampire Knight tokens, they'll each enter with 5 +1/+1 counters, as well as giving 5 +1/+1 counters to all of our other creatures. Vodalian Wave Knight does something similar, but only when we draw cards and only for our other knights, which is fine since most of the creatures are knights after all. With the amount of cards we're drawing, the number of +1/+1 counters given is insane. Starlight Spectacular doesn't give +1/+1 counters, but it gives a sequential pump to our creatures. The way this enchantment works is that you are basically arranging your creatures in any order you want. But the first one gets +0/+0, the next one gets +1/+1, the next one after that gets +2/+2, etc. This isn't that hard to keep track of if you order them, which is what the enchantment is hinting at anyways. In any case, this gets ridiculous the more creatures you control, especially if the commander is at the end of the parade. You're essentially giving it +X+X, where X is the number of creatures you control -1. This could be enough to one-shot an opponent out of the game. Same with the other effects too. Elenda and Azor are already 6/6, putting a ton of +1/+1 counters on them can easily take an opponent out of the game. Invasion of New Phyrexia is another way of putting a ton of knight tokens onto the battlefield, especially if you have the mana to spare. With the deck being black, that shouldn't be an issue. However, this battle isn't included solely because it creates X/2/2 knight tokens when it enters the battlefield. If we're able to deal it 6 damage, which is very viable with our flying 6/6 commander, it then transforms into Teferi Akosa of Zhalfir. While his +1 is useful at getting us to draw even more cards in our turn, we do have to discard either 2 cards or a creature. But that doesn't really matter. His -2 ability is where it's at. It's not even his ultimate, but he gives us an emblem that gives our knights +1/+0 and ward 1. Absolute madness, especially considering we can do it again the very next turn if he survives. In grindier games, getting multiples of his emblem makes the game inch closer to the end. His ultimate is also useful since it's interaction. The deck has plenty of interaction though, but it's good to have a planeswalker that seemingly does it all for this deck. Lastly, we can't talk about insane amounts of tokens without mentioning Mandrak Glory Dominus. This doubles the amount of tokens we create under our control. If that weren't enough, it can also become indestructible at instant speed for potentially just 1 mana and 4 life. We do have to also sacrifice either 2 artifacts and or creatures, but with this deck we'll never be short of creatures. You could also run Anointed Procession if you wanted to, but I found that Mondrak was enough. It being indestructible makes it a better choice if you had to choose between the two, which is what I did. As shown, the deck has the potential of winning by overwhelming the board with a huge army of very dangerous Vampire Knights or commander damage. However, if we're unable to swing into anyone, we can still win with non-combat loss of life. Ayara First of Locthwain and Corpse Knight trigger each time a creature enters the battlefield under our control. Well, Ayara will only trigger if the creature is black, but all of the Vampire Knight tokens created are black, so it's fine. These triggers have each opponent lose 1 life. This life loss accumulates very easily, especially if we're also swinging in every time we can, so we can also win via 1,000 cuts, or possibly all at once. Resolving Peer into the Abyss with either of these in play is usually game over when we resolve our commander's trigger. As a bonus, Ayara also gains this life and she can tap and sacrifice another black creature to draw us cards in a pinch. Commissar Severina Rain, Knight's Charge, and Sanctum Seeker also have each opponent lose life off of a trigger, this time attacking with a creature. This gives us the potential of killing off opponents before even reaching the blocker step of combat. We don't even need to swing into each opponent either. We can just Alpha Strike the opponent with the least amount of creatures and each opponent loses the life from the triggers. So good. As a bonus, the Commissar can be used to draw a card while the other 2 gain us a ton of life as well. Psychosis Crawler, Keza, Augur of Agonies, and Shielder the Apocalypse have opponents lose life whenever we draw cards. These also have the potential of ending the game after an epic wheel or draw effect. Queza is the only odd one out of the bunch since she only hits 1 opponent at a time, but she's still useful at hurting them while also gaining us life in the process. Shieldred also gains us life whenever we draw cards. She's quite expensive now, but that's due to standard. She might drop in price after rotation. Malakir Blood Witch and Smitten Swordmaster are 2 more potential win cons, but they're a use once only effect. The Blood Witch drains the entire table when it enters the battlefield, while the Knight does so when being sent on an adventure via Curry Favor. In any case, these are great finishers or ways to put opponents on the ropes and then finish them off with other effects or combat. The following cards are needed by all decks, which are the Interaction, Card Advantage, and Mana Acceleration pieces. Ariel, Knight of Windgrace, and Captivating Vampire are great because they're synergistic interaction. Ariel destroys creatures by tapping herself along with Knights for 1 black mana, while the Vampire steals the creature by tapping 5 vampires. Captivating Vampire is an absolute house in this deck and one of the top 5 cards. Not only does it pump our vampires +1/+1, but the creature stolen also becomes a vampire. With the amount of vampire tokens we're creating, we can steal as many creatures as multiples of 5 we have. Sometimes the best way to get rid of something is to just steal it. Then those stolen creatures turned vampires are further benefited from the boons in the deck. So good. Definitely another auto-include in Elenda and Azor decks. Olivia's Wrath and Perplexing Text are 2 more synergistic interaction effects in the deck. Way more often than not, the first one is a one-sided Wrath since it only hits non-vampire creatures. That's almost the entirety of our board. Anything we do lose, we can just get back by shuffling our graveyard and eventually redrawing into them. Perplexing Test also has the potential of being one-sided if we choose to bounce all non-token creatures, something we're able to do at instant speed, which is quite busted. It can be used defensively or offensively. Such an amazing card here. Overloading Cyclonic Rift is obviously better, but it does require 7 mana to do. In any case, its benefits are quite obvious. For the price of these precons, it might as well have been reprinted here, but I digress. Fierce Guardianship, An Offer You Can't Refuse, Swan Song, Negate, and Dovin's Veto are the deck's counter magic suite, along with Generous Gift for anything that does make it through. These are amazing at preventing the combo player from winning out of nowhere before we can kill them, but they're also great at protecting our board from a counterable board wipe. The deck is still running spells like Teferi's Protection, Clever Concealment, and Flawless Maneuver to protect our token army, especially the first 2 since they protect us from any Mass Bounce, Shuffle, or negative toughness effects. The last 2 have the potential of being free, which makes them even better. The deck is also running Invasion of Gobakhan to protect our army. As a battle, it doesn't do that. It enters the battlefield and disrupts an opponent. But when it's transformed into Light Shield Array, then it becomes a protective effect. However, not only can it be sacrificed at instant speed to give our creatures Hexproof and Indestructible, but it also, at the end of our end step, puts a +1/+1 counter on each creature that attacked that turn. This is yet another way to pump our army as well. This battle is amazing in this deck, don't sleep on it. Etchings of the Chosen is another protective effect that can turn a token into a way to make one of our creatures indestructible. We do have to choose a creature type though. I tend to choose Knight with this one, since most of the non-token creatures in the deck are Knights. All of our knights also get +1/+1, which is great at turning our commander into a 3-turn clock, but its main use is using tokens to protect our knights. Champion's Helm, Giant's Amulet, Lightning Greaves, and Swiftfoot Boots also provide protection, while our commander does have Ward 2, that ain't no Shroud or Hexproof. For that, you need real protection. Keep in mind that Giant's Amulet won't give Hexproof if the creature is tapped, so this is better suited for utility creatures or if we're not attacking with our commander. Mystic Sanctuary is included to recover our instants and sorceries, which has no reason not be included since it doesn't take up a slot in the deck and is fetchable. The deck is running all 9 fetch lands, of which 4 can fetch for this at instant speed in response to drawing a card for that pro gamer move. They're also good at thinning the deck of lands since we'll be drawing into so many cards with this deck. Ashnet's Altar is some very synergistic mana acceleration for the deck. Each token we create has the potential of fueling our commander's X cost in its attack trigger. This in turn snowballs into even more tokens at the end of our turn, since each token sacrifice gives us 2 mana, which in turn is 2 cards drawn for 2 more tokens. We can easily sacrifice them all and get twice as many, possibly even more, at the beginning of our end step. Or, just use them to pay for spells and effects, why not? Wayfarer's Bauble, Navigation Orb, Bitterthorn Nissa's Animus, Sword of the Animist, and Sword of Hearth and Home are the deck's land-based ramp effects, quite fitting for a non-green deck like this one. The first 2 are amazing in the early game, but the 3 swords give us advantage as the game progresses and we're swinging in with creatures. The deck is slightly mid-range anyways, considering the cost of our commander. But we'll get there. Cabal Coffers, Cabal Stronghold, and Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth help with that since these first 2 lands can tap for a ton of mana. Keep in mind that while the Stronghold only counts basic swamps, Urborg turning the deck's basic island and plains into swamps still counts. So we can tap as many basic lands we control that we have the swamp top site. That's why it's worth running here, especially since the deck has 9 basics in it. Jeweled Lotus could also be considered for the deck since it helps get our commander out 3 turns earlier. While testing the deck is not really necessary for the deck to function, but it's obviously amazing when found early on. Hopefully the price drops significantly with its upcoming reprint if you want to include it in your own Elenda and Azor deck, but as I mentioned, it's not necessary for the deck to function. The rest of the deck is just the rest of the lands. The deck's running all 3 opponent lands, all 3 shock lands, Rafine's Tower, Prairie Stream, Sunken Hollow, Command Tower, and Ancient Tomb, as well as 3 of each basic land for all the basic land ramp effects in the deck. As with all of my deck techs, you can build your mana base according to your budget. Whether you include more expensive cards or even cheaper cards is up to you. You do you. This brew is just an idea of how to build around Elenda and Azor. What I love most about this deck is that it's not simply a Vampire Tribal and Knight Tribal deck. There are so many different ways you could take this deck if you wanted to. You can go full-blown Tribal with all of the Vampire and or Knight Lords, or a full combo as well. I decided to go mid-range, but in such a way that you can still win out of nowhere, whether by commander damage, overrunning with a wave of tokens, or death by 1,000 cuts with the life loss effects. If you're interested in the deck list of this spicy brew of mine, you can find a link to it down in the description. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the brewers, for their patronage. I'd also like to thank anyone using my TCG Player affiliate link. That also helps out the channel. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of The Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I am the Mad Kirby, and happy brewing.